How do you destroy the wealth-generating capacity of 1 billion people? You do not need a war. You just need bad economic policy. Welcome to the Indic Intellectual deep dive on India's macroeconomy. Today we are dissecting the exact data of how the Indian state transitioned from a paralyzed socialist bureaucracy into a capitalist supply-side engine. Before we begin, understand that every macroeconomic data point, historical fact, and institutional report I state in this video is strictly sourced, and you will find the complete bibliography in the description below. Let's begin the autopsy. For its first 4 decades, the Indian economy was actively sabotaged by its own leadership. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru laid the foundation of Fabian socialism. To put it simply, Fabian socialism is the arrogant belief that government bureaucrats sitting in New Delhi know how to run businesses better than actual entrepreneurs. The state monopolized key industries, viewed private wealth with deep suspicion, and heavily regulated the free market. Under Indira Gandhi, this system became actively hostile. Through the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act of 1969, the government essentially criminalized the expansion of major private enterprises like Tata and Birla. If a successful Indian businessman wanted to produce 100 extra radios, he had to beg a bureaucrat for a quota expansion. To make matters worse, she introduced the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act of 1973, which put severe caps on foreign ownership. This draconian law forced global giants like Coca-Cola and IBM to physically pack up and leave India by 1977. This era of absolute state control over the economy reached its zenith during the Indian emergency from 1975 to 1977, where constitutional rights were entirely suspended to maintain the regime's grip on power. The state viewed capital as an evil to be controlled rather than an engine to be scaled. The result? A humiliating 3.5% GDP growth average spanning 3 decades, mockingly dubbed by global economists as the Hindu rate of growth. A persistent myth in Indian politics is that the 1991 liberalization was a grand visionary masterstroke by then Finance Minister Manmohan Singh and Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. It was not. While Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi had begun moving away from the older Nehruvian posture in the 1980s by introducing early tech and telecom deregulation, the structural rot was simply too deep. By 1991, India had completely run out of money in an unprecedented balance of payments crisis. We had barely $1.2 billion in foreign exchange reserves left, enough to sustain imports for just 2 weeks. We were so bankrupt that we physically flew our national gold reserves to the Bank of England as collateral just to avoid defaulting. The opening of the Indian economy was an absolute forced surrender to the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. However, this forced liberalization was structurally incomplete. From the late 90s through the UPA 1 and UPA 2 regimes led by Dr. Manmohan Singh, economic policy was held hostage by coalition politics. During UPA 1, the government relied on 59 members of parliament from the communist left front. These communists systematically blocked any meaningful labor or land reforms to protect militant trade unions. By 2013, the world had lost all faith in the Indian story. Morgan Stanley officially labeled India as one of the fragile 5, the most vulnerable, unstable economies on the planet. We were the sick man of Asia, paralyzed by high inflation and a complete lack of policy direction. To understand the sheer fiscal irresponsibility of this era, look at how they handled the economy. To win elections by keeping petrol prices artificially low, the UPA government did not actually subsidize the fuel from the transparent budget. Instead, they forced oil marketing companies to take the loss and issued them oil bonds, essentially massive hidden national IOUs. They pushed over 1.4 lakh crore of principal debt plus billions in interest onto the shoulders of future generations just to artificially suppress their own fiscal deficit on paper. This previous culture of financial illusion culminated in the twin balance sheet crisis. This was a lethal scenario where over-leveraged corporations were too broke to pay and undercapitalized banks were bleeding too much to lend. Massive unchecked loans were handed out to crony capitalists without proper collateral. A prime example is Vijay Mallya's Kingfisher Airlines, which defaulted on loans amounting to nearly 9,000 crore rupees. Because the bank's balance sheets were bleeding from these non-performing assets, they completely stopped giving loans to new, healthy businesses. The India growth story was effectively dead. Critics often point out that the total national debt has increased under the current administration. They are correct, but they are missing the fundamental macroeconomic concept of the quality of debt. The current government inherited the toxic liability of UPA-era oil bonds and has been forced to bleed thousands of crores annually to service the maturing principal. The UPA took on hidden debt to fund consumption, like fuel subsidies that vanish instantly. The current state takes on transparent debt to fund capital expenditure, building physical assets like highways and freight corridors that generate massive revenue and geopolitical leverage for decades. Executing this paradigm shift required a government with an absolute majority, free from communist blackmail. Starting in 2014, the Narendra Modi administration initiated a ruthless structural reset based on supply-side economics. First came the banking surgery. The state executed a 4-step tactical cleanup known as the 4 Rs: recognition, resolution, recapitalization, and reforms. During the UPA era, banks practiced evergreening, playing hide-and-seek with bad loans by issuing new debt just to cover the old interest. Under the new regime, the central bank forced the immediate recognition of this rot. But structural reform requires fear. A rule-based capitalist economy cannot function if a privileged political corporate elite operates above the law. To destroy the socialist era nexus of crony capitalism, the state needed an apex predator. They found it by completely unshackling the Enforcement Directorate. For 10 years under the UPA, the ED was deliberately kept paralyzed. Financial crimes were treated as high society misdemeanors, and the agency was treated as a toothless tiger restricted by coalition blackmail. Under the Modi administration, the macroeconomic objective was simple: destroy the profitability of economic offenses. The government weaponized the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, PMLA, and gave the ED absolute operational independence. The state didn't just arrest offenders, it went after the capital itself. Do not take my word for it. Look at the official comparative data of the ED's performance between the UPA decade from 2004 to 2014 and the BJP decade from 2014 to 2024. When absconding promoters like Vijay Mallya fled in early 2016, the ED hunted down their assets, confiscating over 15,000 crores in massive frauds and literally handing the recovered cash back to the public sector banks to repair their bleeding balance sheets. By prosecuting the nexus of corrupt politicians and crony capitalists, the state permanently altered the risk-reward ratio of doing business in India. For the first time since independence, capital allocation is no longer decided by who you know in New Delhi, but by the actual merit of your balance sheet. The era of the crony phone call was dead. The era of the ED raid had begun. While the ED hunted the absconders, the state needed a permanent legal mechanism to strip defaulting promoters of their assets. Enter resolution. The state passed the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016, or IBC. Before this code, billionaire promoters could default on massive loans but still keep their luxury lifestyles and stay in control of their companies for decades in court. The IBC turned India from a debtor's paradise into a creditor's rights system. If you default today, you lose your company within a strict 270-day window. Look at the SR Steel case, where the state used the IBC to recover over 42,000 crore rupees. Following this, the government initiated recapitalization by pumping capital back into the bleeding banks and finalized it with reforms, merging struggling public banks into global-scale entities. Because of this surgery, as we sit in 2026, gross NPAs have crashed to a historic low of 2.15%, and Indian banks are posting record-breaking profits. While the ED and IBC were crushing top-level corporate cronyism, the state dropped the hammer on the retail shadow economy. On November 8, 2016, the state executed the most aggressive macroeconomic shock therapy in modern history: demonetization. By invalidating 86% of the country's circulating currency overnight, the government sent a brutal, non-negotiable message. Critics hyper-fixated on the long queues and the short-term disruption, but they completely missed the structural masterstroke playing out on the back end. Let's look at the actual math of what demonetization achieved. First, it engineered a liquidity tsunami. Before 2016, trillions of rupees were sitting idle under mattresses and in parallel cash economies, completely useless to the formal state. Demonetization forced that undocumented cash straight into the banking system. Banks were suddenly flush with low-cost deposits, which aggressively drove down lending rates and recapitalized a bleeding financial sector. Second, it triggered a massive tax base expansion. When that shadow money entered the banking system, it left a permanent digital footprint. The state used this data trail to hunt down tax evaders. In the immediate years following the shock, the number of income tax returns filed exploded, pulling millions of informal earners into the formal tax net for the very first time. Third, it initiated the shell company purge. By analyzing the anomalous cash deposits made during the demonetization window, the government identified and struck off over 2 lakh shell companies that were being used strictly for money laundering and tax evasion. It destroyed the architecture of black money. Demonetization was not just about catching cash. It was the forced behavioral modification of a billion people. It created the initial painful friction that forced Indians to adopt digital payments, paving the immediate runway for the UPI revolution. Then came the formalization, the implementation of the goods and services tax. Despite initial friction, the GST destroyed state border tax terrorism, creating a single unified national market. To understand the sheer scale of this success, look at the math. Before GST, India was a fragmented nightmare of 17 different cascading taxes, excise duties, value-added tax, and local checkpoints that forced commercial trucks to idle for days. Monthly indirect tax collections hovered around 80 to 90,000 crore rupees. GST destroyed those internal borders, creating one nation, one tax. Today, in this 2026 fiscal year, total GST collections for the full year have crossed 22.27 lakh crore rupees, an 8.3% growth over the previous year. The state formalized the informal economy and the tax base exploded. But formalization requires transaction velocity. A decade ago, the Indian retail economy was overwhelmingly cash-based, undocumented, and chronically informal. Enter digital public infrastructure. By deploying the Unified Payments Interface, or UPI, the state digitized the street. UPI is now the world's largest real-time retail payment system, accounting for 81% of India's retail digital payments. The government explicitly engineered this DPI layer as a macroeconomic growth engine, pulling millions of informal micro-businesses into the formal credit net. Simultaneously, the Modi government weaponized the budget. During the UPA era, annual infrastructure capital expenditure languished at just 2 lakh crore rupees. Today, that capital allocation has been aggressively multiplied, pushing infrastructure capex to a record 12.2 lakh crore rupees for the 2026 to 2027 fiscal year. The capex surge created the physical foundation, but to capture the global manufacturing shift, the state needed a different weapon entirely. In 2014, a staggering 75% of all mobile phones used by Indians were imported. The turnaround required a ruthless, three-step macroeconomic weapon. Step 1 was Make in India, the philosophy that cut socialist red tape and told the world India was open for business. Step 2 was the stick, tariff weaponization. The government systematically hiked import duties on fully assembled Chinese electronics, making it financially punishing for global companies to keep importing. They sent a clear message. If you want to sell to 1 billion Indians, you have to build it here. Step 3 was the carrot, the production-linked incentive or PLI scheme. The government stopped just asking companies to come and started paying them. They told giants like Apple and Foxconn, if you move your supply chains to Indian soil, we will give you a direct cash percentage of your incremental sales. But India did not just rely on tariffs and incentives. It capitalized on a massive geopolitical tailwind, the China Plus One strategy. As global corporations panicked to diversify supply chains post-COVID, India was policy ready to catch the wave. The data is staggering. Today, India's import dependency for mobile phones has crashed from that initial 75% down to a microscopic 0.02%. In 2025 alone, iPhone exports from India hit a massive $23 billion. But as we sit in 2026, the strategy has moved to the ultimate deep tech value chain. The government rolled out a 50% upfront fiscal support policy, successfully locking in India's first commercial semiconductor fab in Dholera, Gujarat. Driven by the Tata Group with an investment of over 91,000 crore rupees, India is no longer just assembling the world's technology. We are building the chips that power it. Intellectual honesty demands we acknowledge the unfinished agenda. The macroeconomic transformation is structurally incomplete. Meaningful labor law reforms remain politically stuck, and the attempt to formalize the agricultural sector was completely abandoned after the farm law protests. The state won the capital battle, but the political battle over land and labor remains a massive vulnerability. Yet, the ultimate proof of the transition came not in New Delhi spreadsheets, but on the world stage. By 2026, India had rewritten the script. Once branded one of Morgan Stanley's Fragile Five, the country now sits as the world's fourth largest economy, with foreign exchange reserves forming an impregnable buffer exceeding $650 billion. To leverage this newly formalized economy, the state violently pivoted away from 30 years of trade isolationism. By aggressively executing comprehensive economic partnership agreements with the UAE and Australia and signing the India-EU FTA, India is forcing its way into global supply chains. Simultaneously, the operationalization of Gift City in Gujarat is actively pulling global capital away from offshore hubs like Singapore and Dubai, laying the groundwork for absolute financial independence. The DPI revolution went global. What began as street-level transaction velocity in India became an export product. Countries across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America began adopting Indian-built real-time payment systems and ONDC-style open commerce networks. India didn't just formalize its own economy, it handed the developing world the tools to formalize theirs. This was the logical conclusion of a philosophical U-turn. Trust entrepreneurs, not edicts. Build assets, not illusions. Enforce creditor rights, not crony phone calls. In 1969, a successful Indian businessman had to beg a New Delhi bureaucrat just to produce 100 extra radios. Today, an Indian engineer in Dholera is designing a semiconductor chip that will end up powering a smartphone sold in Sao Paulo. That is the arc of a civilizational state reclaiming its economic destiny. If this autopsy of the Indian economy changed the way you view our geopolitical rise, drop a like right now. The algorithm needs to know that Indian audiences demand data-driven analysis, not political noise. The autopsy is far from over. Make sure you are subscribed to Indic Intellectual with notifications turned on as we prepare to enter Pillar 2, where we dissect how India destroyed bureaucratic silos and weaponized its infrastructure.